Hello everybody, thank you for coming. My name is Chris Farmer. I've done a mind map over the last couple of days, which is intended to express a lot of ideas onto a single diagram. And in the next couple of minutes, I'd like to position the UK liberty in its relationship to liberty, freedom, and also in relation to the two main parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, and also to put it into some kind of historical context. So it's quite a big ask. We'll take about 10 minutes. So we start with the word freedom. Now, let's just take a common sense view of what that means, freedom. It means freedom to act in accordance with your own values, to pursue your own life goals, and to be free of coercion, either from other citizens or from the government. Freedom. We'll talk a little bit more about its definition a bit later, but let's just assume that everybody's got a pretty good idea what they mean when they say freedom. And I've got arrows going up saying more freedom, arrows going down saying less freedom. So let's go up to the maximum amount of freedom that is possible. Now, if you go up to the maximum amount of freedom that is possible, you go back to raw nature. So this is the hunter-gatherer. There are no police, there are no institutions, there is no law, there is no anything. There's just people doing whatever the hell they please, which sounds great, but is it really? Because what you end up with is a state of what some people call anarchy, which means there's no government. There's no law. If a man wants to beat somebody to death, they can. There's no one to stop them. Anyone can do anything. I call this the law of the jungle, or the wild. The closest that we can probably remember, so culturally, would be the Wild West in North America, probably 1860, when the travelers were going across the United States. They could do anything. Now, is that really freedom? Probably not. Because what you get then is the law of the jungle. Whoever's got the fastest gun, whoever's got the most vicious gang wins. And therefore, what would appear to be the dream, which is a maximum amount of individual freedom, actually collapses in on itself, and it's no freedom at all, unless you happen to be the biggest, strongest person in the town. So we don't want that. We don't want anarchy, because we don't believe that anarchy actually is liberty. We think it's the opposite of liberty in a strange way. We position ourselves to say that we believe in more freedom, maximum amount of individual freedom, but that's not a blank check. It's governed by individual rights. So freedom comes with a set of rights. Now, I'll talk about the rights later. Freedom means that we are free to act according to our own values and according to our own goals for the pursuit of our own wealth, health, and happiness, and that of our families. But that is limited by rights, because everyone else in the society has the same rights. So we can't violate the rights of other people in the pursuit of our goals. The pursuit of our goals is bounded by the rights of others. So we can only achieve our goals without violating the rights of others. Now that's where we sit. I put UK liberty there. We think that's so damned obvious. We don't know why everyone doesn't think that way. But the truth is, well, maybe they do, but they don't act that way. Because there's a lot of theories that has less than this in terms of freedom. And those theories are essentially statist collectivist theories of government. The question asks, who should govern? And the answer to that is the state should govern, because, for example, Plato said that governing is a very skilled task, like surgery, and you wouldn't give anybody the role of a surgeon. You have to be trained to be a surgeon. So Plato came up with the idea of the philosopher king, where only the philosopher kings should form the body of the state, and everyone else pretty much has to do what they're told. So in Plato's Republic, he was the first person to set into writing the intellectual argument which backs up the statist collectivist view of the government, run by a small group of people who are experts at what they do. Today, I think that we are faced on everyday life with a false alternative, because we have in discussion, all politics is based upon the words left and right. They talk about left and right wing of politics. And in general terms, the Conservatives are put on the right of that line, and the Labour Party are put on the left, and they pose as adversaries. They pose as if they were opposites. But I'd like to make the claim that they are exactly, they are the same, in that they both believe in statist collectivist solutions to our problems. Any problem that crops up, the government has to step in and legislate. That's pretty much taken as a given. Any problem that comes up, it requires legislation to make sure this never happens again. And bit by bit, more and more laws are churned out by the Conservatives and Labour governments. They pose as opposites, but actually they're the same. Now, if we take the phrase extreme right, most people would associate the word Nazi to extreme right, as if, and the extreme left would be like a Marxist communist. And during the Second World War, you had Stalin fighting with Hitler. Now, they seem like enemies, but actually they're not enemies. They are identical in the sense that they both believe that the individual in their country has no rights. So it doesn't matter if you're in a Stalinist gulag or in a Nazi concentration camp, you're still locked up with no rights. So they agree on the fundamentals. In fact, Nazi even is a socialist party. The word Nazi means National Socialist Workers' Party, and Hitler was a great advocate of National Socialism. The only difference between Nazis and communists are that the Nazis allowed business to exist within the framework of the state, provided that the businesses played ball with the state. As you know, in Soviet Russia, private enterprise is not necessarily condoned. So that takes us back to the 1940s. Before that, all the way through the Dark Ages, power was distributed between two major groups, the crown and the nobles, or the barons and the king, or the barons and the queen, and then the church. So the church and the king and his knights effectively had all the power. Everybody else didn't. And that went on for about 1,500 years, from the collapse of the Roman Empire up to kind of the Renaissance times, where we had more liberty coming through on the political side. But for many hundreds of years, the king's word was sacrosanct, and the king got his authority from the church. When I say authority, moral authority, because it was called the divine right of kings. And in return, the king would provide the military means to safeguard the assets owned by the church. So the church and the king carved up the power, and everyone else had nothing. Now, as you know, the power of the church has faded and the power of the monarchy has faded, but I think they've simply been replaced. The role of the church, which was to give moral sanction to the political actions of the king, has been replaced by scientists. So you see Boris Johnson justifying everything he's doing, every attack he makes on liberty. He says, we're following the science. So the scientists are playing the role of what the church used to do, which is giving moral sanction to the politicians' actions. And in return, the politicians are doing what they used to do for the church, which is effectively to pay them for it. So the politicians and the scientists now are taking exactly analogous positions as the king and the church did during the Middle Ages. And again, the relationship is getting similar, because the church relies on faith, and now so do scientists. The scientists say, don't argue with us, just take it on faith. We're the experts, a little bit like Plato's philosopher kings. They say, look, you're probably not very clever. You're not educated like us. You have to take it on faith. And the opposite of faith, of course, I should say the corollary of faith is force. If you Faith and force has always gone together, and the king and the politicians are now using force. There is a third element which didn't exist in the Middle Ages, which are what I call cronies. Do you remember the phrase Tony's cronies that was around a couple of years ago? The cronies are the business agencies like the tech companies and the media companies who are attracted to the politicians because the politicians are able to supply them with what they want, which is money. So what this is the kind of quotes business that doesn't rely on satisfying its customers, and it doesn't make sales. What it does, it gets funding. Now, government funding is now the holy grail for many businesses and many scientists. There's many scientific enterprises that wouldn't exist without government funding. And there's many whole industries, for example, a lot of the, say, wind farms, the electrical generation by windmills, that wouldn't exist without government funding because it's uneconomic without government funding. But what we're doing step by step, in my opinion, step by step, we're returning back to the Middle Ages, effectively what you might call serfdom, where the state has absolute power and control over the individual. And they are attacking step by step individual rights and freedoms of the citizens. And we're effectively turning back the pages to go back to the time when we were serfs with no rights. Okay, so I just want to pause here so that you can see where we are positioned. Labour Party and the Conservative Party, the so-called right and left, which are actually both statist and collectivists organisations, just with different clothes and different personalities, but pretty much the same policies. And we are well above those in the sense that we are believing in individual rights over the power of the state, whereas they believe in the state over the power of the individual. Now, I drew this afternoon, so I better pause my presentation and ask Kevin to make a comment. Kevin, where I've presented UK Liberty, Labour and Conservative, do you want to make any comment or addition to what I've already said?
No, I think you've positioned that very well. They are the same, both sides of the same coin, and we're not the same coin. Great.
Okay, so we're in agreement with that. That's terrific. Okay, let's talk about the real world stuff. Now, this is the theoretical stuff that we believe in. Maximum individual rights bounded by maximum individual freedom bounded by individual rights. The practical expression of that in economic terms is free market solutions to the society's problems. As opposed to what I just said, where any time that there is a problem, the government must step in and legislate. So we believe that the free market, the creative power of the average human is far superior to the creative power of the small number of people who happen to be in the cabinet at any one time. So we believe in free market solutions to economic and social problems. Now, the word which best describes UK Liberty's position on economics is laissez-faire capitalism, as opposed to collectivism. Laissez-faire capitalism, laissez-faire is French for effectively leave it done, leave it alone, leave it to do it, leave us to do it our way. Laissez is leave, faire is to do. So laissez-faire really means, in a strange way, leave us to get on with it, hands off. The government, there's no need to step in at every juncture. The economy is capable of doing it on its own. When I say the economy, that means everybody in it. That means the public. Probably the most well-known author is Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, I think in 1775, and set down the basic principles of classical economics. And more modern incarnations would be the Austrian school, von Mises, Friedman, and Thatcher. They used to call it Thatcherism. It isn't really Thatcherism. It's simply free market solution problems. Correction, free market solutions to social and economic problems. And as far as Kevin and myself are concerned, the best exponent in terms of explaining it is Ayn Rand. Now, Ayn Rand was never a very successful politician. She never tried to be. She was a successful novelist. But Thatcher was the closest that I think we've ever come to a politician who believes in a free market, brackets, smaller government. She argued for smaller, she's probably unique in the history of politics to be the only politician who argued for smaller government. Every other government is self-interested and wants larger governments, so they grow like weeds. So that's the end of that diagram. I'm just going to go to my second diagram. Okay, so picking it up on the word laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire free market capitalism is based upon the principle that every actor, every economic actor, meaning every child, every person who goes down the shops is free to choose what products, what services they spend their money on. We don't need the government to decide for us where our money should go. We can all choose, and then the marketplace decides what products and services will stay in the market and what products and services are excluded from the market, not by government sanctions or laws, but by public choice. And the idea here is that with the bell curve of like intelligence, if you just think that the vast majority of morons are counteracted by the small minority of morons, and the small minority of geniuses cancel each other out, and the mean, that mass quantity of common sense people making thousands upon thousands of decisions ends up as a pretty good approximation to the truth. So that's really the basis between laissez-faire, which is when millions of people are acting, the amalgamated choices ends up as a good choice. And that's what they call the invisible hand, which was the mass quantities of choices amalgamating to a single good choice. So freedom means, let's look at the definition of freedoms. Freedoms means to act in accordance with your own goals and values in pursuit of your own wealth, health, and happiness. And probably we should put on another circle there saying, and that of your family. But freedom also means the absence of coercion, the absence of coercion. Coercion means the inducement of another to act by means of force, fear, or the threat of force. So you don't persuade the person, you don't even try, you just threaten them, which tells me a story about myself. I've just been having knocks on the door from the census person because I haven't done my census. And the reason I didn't do my census is because when the letter dropped through my letterbox, it came complete with a threat. It said, do this sentence or you'll get a £10,000 fine and a criminal record, and you might even go to jail. That was how they asked me to fill in one of their forms. It came ready-made with a threat. They didn't even think to ask me nicely. They assumed a threat was a normal way of doing business. So I took their pieces of paper and I stuck them in the bin. I'm not going to fill their bloody forms in because they threatened me if I didn't, so I didn't. If they'd have asked me nicely, I might have done it. If they'd have said to me, we are trying to figure out where to put our resources, so we would like to get some information from you about what services you need so that we can provide them, I might be interested, but not with a threat. So I like to live, we probably all like to live in the absence of coercion. Coercion from whom? Coercion from other citizens. That would be people like burglars and thieves. We don't want to be coerced by them. We don't want to be coerced by invading governments. And we certainly don't want to be coerced by our own government. But actually, that's what they are doing. They're coercing us all the time. Now, freedom to choose. Bounded by basic rights. We don't have absolute freedom to choose anything. It's not like I can choose to go out and murder somebody. That doesn't mean freedom. I'm bounded by basic rights. The concept of basic rights was probably most succinctly described by a guy called John Locke, which you've probably heard of. But he was also built upon more recently by Ayn Rand, and I think Ayn Rand's done a good job of developing the concept of individual rights. Some of the problems with the early speakers of individual rights was that they relied on religion to back it up. They said that we were born issued by God with unalienable rights. So kind of it was relying on a religious base. Ayn Rand gets rid of the religious base and says it's not based upon religion, it's based upon the nature of humans themselves. Well, let's talk about this. Why is coercion wrong according to our theory? It's not because God says it's wrong, it's because it's anti-mind. That's why. And human beings, by their nature, are the rational animal. We are the only animal on the planet that uses rationality as its means of survival. Every other animal uses a different method. Some animals can fly, some animals have got long claws, and some animals are very fast. Physically speaking, we are very puny compared to many animals. We're not particularly vicious in that sense, but we're very clever compared to other animals. And that's our rational mind that makes us the most dominating animal on the planet. It's our reason or our sense of logic that gives us our physics, our mathematics, our culture, our philosophies, our ethics, our politics, and everything else that makes us human comes from a single faculty, which is the rational mind. And when you're dealing with other people, there's only really two ways to deal with other people. You either deal with them according to the principles of reason and you persuade them to do things, or you don't. You use non-rational means, i.e. force or coercion. Now, as I say, the government didn't try to persuade me to fill that form in. The very first thing that they thought to do was to force me to fill it in by a threat of a prison sentence, a £10,000 fine and a criminal record if I didn't fill their form in. So they are inherently anti-mind. In fact, they're engaged in what I would call psychological warfare on the British people. They are destroying not only people's livelihoods, but a lot of people's peace of mind. That's an interesting point. I've only first thought of that. They're destroying people's peace of mind. They are anti-mind and they're doing it on purpose. We retain, in UK liberty, we think that we've all got the right to freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of association, freedom to trade in our businesses, and freedom to protest. And I've got the freedom to breathe without having my airway blocked by a face mask, so I don't wear face masks either. Doesn't matter how many times they threaten me. So let's zoom in on this one. Don't know what you think of this statement. The present government is the most coercive administration we've had for centuries. I can't think of a government, even, I mean, not that old, but I mean, going back in history, I can't think of a government that was more coercive. Probably Henry VIII, I would say, was probably the one back in time that kind of matched the coercive powers that this government is dishing out at the moment in terms of the legal frameworks that they created. Now, the question is, are they stupid? Are they mistaken? Or are they malicious? My personal feeling is that they're malicious. I don't think they're mistaken. I don't think they're stupid. I think they're doing it on purpose. I think they know exactly what they're doing. And I think they're doing it on purpose. What do you think?
Okay, who was that?
Yeah, I believe that was me. Yeah, certainly at first I thought they were just mistaken and acting foolishly. But the longer it goes on, and even to this point now, just with each day that goes on, I'm led more to believe that it's malicious. And there's just more and more things come together, which leads me to believe that. And actually, Rand has a good quote on about when somebody is making mistakes so often, you have to begin to question their intentions. I can't remember the precise quote, but it's well beyond that point now, I think.
Yes. Bruns got another great quote which says something like, the government's only power is to crack down on criminals, and when there isn't enough, they make more by making everything a criminal offence. And that is, when I read that, I thought that's an interesting quote. And I'm horrified now, as that is more and more becoming true, where practically anything is becoming an offence, just normal living, like breathing in is becoming, breathing in without an obstructed airway is becoming an offence. So Ayn Rand, I think, was about 50. I think she's right. She was probably 50 or 60 years ahead of her time. And have you heard of the book? You probably have, if you're objectivist. You've probably heard Leonard Peikoff's book of The Ominous Parallels. Have you heard that book, The Ominous Parallels? And you may have read it. I think he wrote it about 1980, and what he was doing was warning Western democracies, particularly America, that there are correlations between what he sees, what he saw going on in the early 1930s in Nazi Germany, and what he sees is beginning to take shape here in the Western world now. And although people are saying, oh, it could never happen here, government could never take over like they did then, why not? Why can't they take over? The only thing that stops them is people, and the people aren't stopping them. And the way I believe that they're not, the reason that they're not stopping them is simply, I've got a single answer to that, which is they've still got faith in the scientists. I don't think they've got faith in politicians, but I think that most people still believe scientists. And I don't think scientists are any better than any other group of people. They're self-interested and they don't mind lying if it gets them money. And I think there's plenty of scientists that have and do lie in exchange for cash. They're in bed with politicians and the cronies. And I think that's the weak link in our theory here, is that people still believe what they're told by scientists. And I think that I believe that the vast majority of Britons do live here mentally. I believe that people do believe in maximum individual freedoms governed by individual rights. I think that is by far the most prevalent view of most common sense Britons. And that they are, when they look at what the Conservative Party and the Labour Party are getting up to when they get to the House of Commons, they shake their head in disbelief and they say, isn't there anyone out there with common sense? Because these people don't seem to have any. They just seem to be quibbling over details, which is actually true because they're actually in agreement with many things. They both believe in collectivist stated solutions to all our problems, and the government should be sticking its nose into everyone's business on every issue. And I don't think that the people think like that. I think there is a potentiality for us to have a chord.
So I do agree with you on your other page about freedom from coercion. I looked at it and I thought freedom from other citizens' coercion is the police who use force when all reason has failed for the thieves that want to take your stuff. From other governments, the military use force to defend you from other governments who also want to take your stuff, pillage the land and so forth. But I don't see, I disagree with you on why our own government, how they're coercing us so, how they have so much coercion on us so much, is because I don't think it's because people still have faith in scientists. I think it's the biggest elephant in the room for libertarianism in the UK, which is firearms. And I'd probably go on it about most weeks, but it's the thing that sort of got me into the sort of libertarian philosophy itself. The government does not fear its citizens like a thief fears the police, because we can protest all we like, but I mean, the thing they'd fear most is revolt, and that is like a radical position, and I know I'm not advocating it, but that is politically what I think stops most governments. But you could make the argument that the Second Amendment in America hasn't done much to limit government action over the past 200 years of the experiment. But yeah, I think the the thing that stops coercion of government isn't people losing the faith in scientists. I think it's governments fearing their own citizens. But I also think that firearms in the UK it's the biggest elephant. I think no one wants to speak about it because culturally the argument was won after Dunblane, and trying to get anyone to speak about firearms is almost impossible unless they're sort of similar to us and think it's worth talking about.
What is your aim when you say that? Are you advocating arming the public?
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, I think limited arms, obviously not recreational nukes, but limited arms for the public to be on par with the force in which they would be coming up against if the government went full tyrannical. Is what sort of stops the government from doing so. When you have 65 million people who are armed with, like the standard arms of the day, the military force that are being used to try to suppress them are going to find it a hard time. If you just look at Afghanistan, Vietnam, any of the modern wars, the guerrilla warfare sort of stops those sorts of armies as all.
Okay, but look at what you're saying. And again, this is the difference between philosophy and politics. If you're talking about real world politics, 2021 in Britain, and you stand up in front of a group of people and say, I believe that we should issue 65 million people with guns so that they can stick up to the government, it's an absolute non-starter. No one on the planet. So you've got to think in the sense of, yeah, okay, philosophically you might be right. If we weren't starting where we're starting, if we could go back in time and arm the civilians so that when the government tries to impose its will, it wouldn't have a chance because there's no army with 65 million people in it. Yeah, that would be a great idea, except that's not where we are in this world, in this timeline. So it's kind of academic to discuss whether it would work to arm the public. It probably would. It's a great idea, except it ain't ever going to happen.
Chris, I 100% agree with you on that. I think no one could, that's what I mean, no one could stand up and say it because the argument's been lost for so long and things have gone so far. But I know the party's got stepping stones in mind, and I think I was a part of a firearms sort of community for about 4 years, and I think it is possible to slowly increment firearms back into UK life. There's gun ranges that teach safety. It's the thing about like places like America is that culturally firearms are like you grow up and you get taught gun safety, and there's a culture of safety sort of there. The 60,000 deaths a year are by the by with culturally like that. It's a lot of other reasons, but you couldn't today just hand everyone a firearm because it'd be like handing children guns without any prior safety.
Exactly. And you couldn't advocate it because if you advocated it, the moment you advocate it, you'd be locked up. So
what I would suggest would be trying to get more people into the sport of it, because to me, once someone has gotten into firearms or at least shot a firearm, they know that their opinion can change quite quick. I've seen it in my 4 years in the community, but it would be very slow. It would be a cultural change and a cultural shift, and the aim would be to stop politicians from going even further, since they have since the Offensive Weapons Bill, to protect liberty as it is, to stop them going further. But I understand. I fully agree with you. We couldn't just stand up and say, "Oh, we need to arm everyone," but to say, we're not for the taking away of more rights of firearms. You definitely earn about 500,000 voters who are in the firearms community who need someone to just stand there and say, "We're not taking it anymore." Is all. I agree with you, Chris. I know what you mean.
Okay, so the way I see it is, here's a philosophy I don't agree with, but the word is sometimes used for: pragmatic. I'm not a pragmatist, but the word itself means, what can we do in the practical reality to achieve our goals? I mean, what is something that could actually work today? What is it? What is it that's going to get us from 4 to maybe 10, right? So, and then 10 to 10,000. We have to be pragmatic, not too abstract or too philosophical. How do you stop a government like this? Give me the steps. So the way I see it is the steps that we take is to give the argument. You give the argument. You don't dish people out with guns. You give them words. You express the argument and you argue. You say, no, they're wrong. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not filling in the form. I'm not compliant because I own my life, not that the government doesn't own my life. And you ask people if they agree. Do you own your life or does the government own your life? Do you have the right to breathe without having an obstructed airway or not? And then you ask them to join. I think that's the 3-step plan that we could all subscribe to. Make the argument, ask people if they agree with that argument. Do you think it's got some merit? And they'll say, yeah, I think it's got a bit of merit. Well, join the next meeting then and bring them along. And I think we have to make sure that we're pragmatic in the sense that we have to talk about things that can actually start working this month, not in 20 years. I'm talking a lot, and you can stop me at any time. Just to let you know, I can make these diagrams into downloads, and I could send them to Kevin, and Kevin could send them to you. Question: would that be a useful exercise to turn those into handouts and send them to you? We've got that one and the other one.
I would like it so I can continue going over it and seeing the connections of everything.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on it. I think that bit that you're on there just now, you hit on a good point where we now have this sort of oligarchy of scientists, big tech and government all sort of working in this collusion together, and our government has sort of become this mix of all three of them, and who we're obedient to has become a mix of all three of them. And there's a lot of people right now that recognize that, and there's a lot of people that are politically homeless as a result of this, because many people voted Conservative in 2019 to, ward off Corbyn and socialism, and they thought they were getting somebody more right wing and sort of liberty leaning with Boris Johnson, and he's just sort of proven to be everything against that. So there's a lot of people out there that are really disgruntled with this, business owners, and just even if you just look at like on Twitter, like you have loads of like normal mums and dads and whatnot that have just like come onto Twitter and are now really involved with talking about this sort of stuff. So my question was really, what can be done on a local level from the party to kind of start tapping into this group that are just politically homeless? Because like realistically, you're not going to go in and overthrow the Conservatives or Labour because it's the two-party system, and when you try and fight them, you're fighting against the scientists, big tech, and this whole cathedral of people. So it needs to be like a sort of grassroots movement to really start trying to tap into these people who recognize that what is going on isn't wrong, and that all of our rights are sort of being stripped away by this oligarchy that's now creating this sort of two-tiered system where we're down on the bottom and you have all of these sort of elites on the top. And just what can be done to start tapping into these people, because I think that's where the success lies, I guess.
Well, I think I just answered that question. I gave you a little list of 3, which is make the argument, ask them if they agree, and if they do agree, invite them. Any one of us can do that, and I do. Every week I'm here with Kevin making the arguments. I'm trying to find people who agree with me. And the truth is, I don't find that many, because most of them have still got faith in the scientists and the government. I don't. So I invite as many people as I can. But as we find with Kevin, Kevin had what, 30 odd invites accepted, but when it actually comes to the crunch,
31 this week.
That's another problem we've got. Apathy rules, but who cares? So even if you do invite people, they don't necessarily come. So we have to make the argument and invite more and more people and never stop. I think, as I said before, I think the government will assist us, because the more draconian they come, the more ordinary people, normal people will come upset, and they will find that they are beginning to drift into an absolute statist ideology, which they never signed up for when they voted Tory. I thought we were going to get our freedom back when we voted for Mr. Johnson, get rid of the anti-democratic European Union, and we've slipped into something a lot worse than we had before.
Chris?
The party is more. Yes, please.
I don't know. Sorry, it's like keeps me. I was just like, because I didn't know whether you could see that the hand was raised. So like, please continue what you were saying, and then I'll jump in.
No, I finished. You carry on.
Oh, okay. So, so just Ryan, you were talking about firearms. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think at some point that'll be a really interesting conversation to have, and I think that'll be something worth having when we're maybe all together. Because in the greatest respect, I completely disagree, and it'll be interesting to like kind of talk that out and like see how we come to like kind of an understanding on that. And Chris, you know, I think you're completely right in a sense of, I think at this moment in time, what we have to start thinking about is political moves. So I suppose I kind of like to kind of go with where my thoughts on what you were saying were. Adam, I think you're right. I think there's a great majority of people that are potentially there ready for us to kind of reach out to. I suppose I'd kind of like to start from the first point is that I disagree with making, for example, I know Chris, like you probably have a lot of others as well, but I think, for example, like the mask thing is quite a weak argument to go head first into, because, for example, I'm probably like kind of unique among here, but I have no issue wearing a mask. I don't when I'm by myself, because I got myself an exemption badge, so fuck that. Do you know what I mean? But for example, like my girlfriend has very vulnerable parents, and it makes her feel safer, even though we both know it's bullshit and COVID is threw her job into complete ridiculousness. So she's very much aligned with me, but it gives her an element of some sort of safety for me to wear one when we're together, which doesn't make sense to me, but I can do that because at the end of the day, it's no great pain to me. And I don't wear it that much. I understand people who, for example, wear hours in the day, and I don't necessarily see that element of kind of helping someone else feel maybe a little bit more secure as some element of great self-sacrifice. But obviously, I don't oppose your, if you don't want to wear one, don't fucking wear one. I don't really care. Like, that's obviously your choice. But I think in regards to where we go, like, I think the first thing, the most important thing for me is that we don't define ourselves as right-wing. Because I think right is something that exists within the current political status quo. And right is, I think it was actually Kevin, I think you put something up on Twitter a while ago, and it was where the left would like you to sacrifice yourself for society, and the right would like to sacrifice yourself to the nation. And I think they both exist in a very, very collectivist mindset.
Yes.
So yeah, like I think we would all agree. So I think the first step is for us to define ourselves as distinctly different from the current status quo. Yes. And I think then within that, I think we should focus more on how do we empower people. It's not about necessarily, you know, well, a government has done this and this is what we're going to give back to you. I think it's more about, okay, what can we do that another government can't? You know what I mean? What are we going to give you? For example, we're going to give you more of your money back. We're going to give you the right to choose who you voluntarily associate with within a market. We're going to give you the right to take a job, even though it might be less than the wage that we define as like livable by like any sort of kind of, you know, ridiculous paradigm. So I think the step is to start, which is really why I really, really like that 7 habits that you came up with. because I think it really started, and the way we actually start winning people is by telling them this is what we do for you. Like I'm from Liverpool, so Thatcher will never ever be sold as anything other than the devil in Liverpool. Even though I personally don't have much of an issue with her, but it will never ever, like, you're never going to sell anything related to Thatcher in Liverpool. But what you will sell is people's right to live their own lives, and I think that's our starting point.
Yes, I 100%. I mean, you are right. We are, according to this diagram here, we are not on the right. We're not on the left. That right and left is a false alternative. It's a trick. It's heads I win, tails you lose. We're not on that coin at all. We are completely different because we are advocating what they aren't, which is maximum individual freedom. That's what we're advocating. And we're advocating free market solutions, not government solutions to everything. Let's try the free market enterprise way, because that's what made Britain great in the first place, from the Industrial Revolution onwards. That's what built Britain. And that's what made, when they say Great Britain, that's what made Britain great, was its trade. You see, it's trading. We're a trading nation by nature. In fact, Napoleon said that the English are a nation of shopkeepers, and that was true. And that's the people that we need to get back, because these poor shopkeepers have been put out of business. So we're coming to an end. Kevin, would you like to wrap this up?
I was just.
Oh, sorry. Somebody wanted to say something.
Oh no! I'm worried that I'm just continuously talking, like someone else says something. No. I think I think you're completely right, and I think I think the next step. I mean, I'm currently writing. I suppose like my first maps, and I think it's kind of like hopefully it will be done like within like a couple of weeks. And it's just like a general proposal of maybe, like, for example, how we could think about the tax system moving forward. And I think maybe like as a kind of, I suppose, like a practical and pragmatic thing to do now is for us all to start kind of like thinking about, okay, well, what does, whether we define it as libertarian or we define it as simply as a state of liberty, what does that look like within the UK? I mean, I think it's beautifully simple, because actually, the best government is a small, boring government that doesn't do anything, basically. Yeah. But I think we have to start building a vision of what does that look like, and then give it to people.
I think you're right. Why don't you start making a list and bring it to us next time?
What are things we should do?
Yeah. It's a great idea. I mean, I came up with that 7 habits of highly effective nations. Bring it up to 15.
Yeah, no. I think, I mean, like, obviously, and as I said, I'm putting forward a proposal at the moment, which is more kind of like, how does something fit within our look of within our thought process of how rights can be like built in regards to tax. And like, kind of, obviously, I found that lecture with John really interesting a couple of weeks ago, even though he would probably completely disagree with what I'm actually going to say, but it was really helpful, like, to hear that. But yeah, no, like, I think maybe like that would be, yeah. I mean, I'd love, obviously, it's other people as well. Do you know what I mean? So I'd love, obviously, like, kind of, I'd really like to know what other people think that world looks like.
One of the things I find when I'm training, because I'm a trainer by nature, that's what I do for a living, is if you put your ideas down on the table, it triggers other people's ideas. But if you just say, what do you think? They can't think of anything. They can only think of it when they're contrasting their ideas to yours. So if you just say, I'd like to open a discussion, who wants to say something? It goes horribly quiet. You're much better off saying, this is what I think. I think we should be doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You put that on the table and it triggers ideas. So
okay,
so write your ideas down and make a presentation next time.
Maybe not a presentation, not quite at the presentable level yet. But one thing I would like maybe to say then, and I'd love like maybe next time, is if kind of like, maybe to give us all something to think about, is that, again, this actually comes from the Liberty Party Twitter. Like, I seen a comment that someone made on something, and it was that if we want to move towards a system of true laissez-faire capitalism. So, but the irony is, of course, is that the past 100 years haven't existed under that system. So, for example, if we simply removed all regulations tomorrow, would we enter a system by which actually everybody was free to act? Or do we actually need to do something first? And that's something that I'm still not sure on. Do we actually need to, is it free markets or freed markets? Do we actually need to literally free the markets? And does some sort of like restorative process need to happen by which certain companies, I loathe to say it, and I don't think it's true because I don't actually agree with it, but I think it's something that does need to be talked about. Do we break certain companies up? Do we remove the monopoly from certain companies in order to actually free a market, or do we simply remove all regulations and go, right, go? And I think that's something that I think that would be something really worth us building a policy or a thought process on.
I think the answer to your question is it's never revolution, it's evolution. Not revolution, but evolution. It's what you do is you name the party names its direction of travel. That's all it does. It says we're here now, and we're going to turn the ship around. We're going to start sailing off in this direction. That doesn't mean you arrive at your destination tomorrow morning. It means you start now, and tomorrow we're 1 mile away, you know, and then another mile, then another mile. And it's one step at a time. But no one can just take 50 years of socialist state support and pull it. That'd be like pulling the rug from under these people. Can't do it that way. So it has to be taken down in the same way that it was erected, which is one brick at a time. But the point is, nobody will take the first brick down if the principle itself has never been articulated cleanly. You have to say the principle is less government, not more government. We want, putting it the other way, more freedom and less government rather than the other way around. Because at the moment, we're getting it the other way around. We get more government, less freedom. So I think the answer to it is two key words are evolution versus revolution. You can't have a revolutionary approach because it kills people. Literally, revolutions normally end up with people dying. And evolution is a slow process. So we have to start slow, but the direction can be made today. That's what you say. We can change direction in a heartbeat, and we can. So you just have to make the argument. Once you've made the argument about the direction of travel, everything else then is done brick at a time.
The ideas are so important. Is that you need to get the ideas straight so that you can say, look, this is the ideas. This is where it will take us. And here's how we would do it in the meantime, step by step by step by step. But unless you've got the fundamental ideas clear in our minds, in other people's minds, i.e. putting the argument and getting them to agree with us, but you can, until the cows come home, they won't come along with you. So the agreement is on the very fundamental ideas of liberty is something worth having, freedom is something worth having, and the rights that secure those are worth having and need to be understood what they are. Because a lot at the minute people say you've got the left saying, well, you've got a right to a house, you've got a right to healthcare, you've got a right to education, and you've got the right saying you haven't got a right to all those things. One's right and one's wrong, but they don't know why they're right and the others don't know why they're wrong. So it's getting that idea across first so that people have got something to agree with you on, that when you do the next step, they can see it's a logical step from your fundamental, from your base ideas. Yes, if you've got, Peter, this is to you, if you've got ideas you want to suggest, you want for me to adopt and take along, I'm more than listen. And if you want a sizzle session of your own where you can put all your ideas and we can just all sit here and talk about it for an hour and see what we can come up with concrete out of that, I'm happy to do.
A small number of very committed and knowledgeable, I suppose, like kind of like understanding of what it is that they're fighting for. Like, I mean, I think, isn't that a statistic that said you only need 3.7% of a population that truly believes in something and the rest will slowly fall in line? So I think it's like, I think adding on to what you're saying, Chris, I think if we can find people that are, you know, able to like kind of articulate and actually able to really, really fully digest it. I think especially at the beginning, we need people to be on board who are fully able to say, no, this is why I believe in what, you know, we believe. This is what we stand for. This is what it's about. And I think that will actually be, that's the most powerful thing. Like I liken it to, for example, like when you first start a band, 10 fans who turn up to every show, buy a t-shirt, are better than 30 people who turn up half the time. So it's kind of like, I would say, I think at this, I don't know if that's correct, you know, obviously like kind of that might be wrong, but for me, it's like, it's also, we need people who are actually fully invested, and they're the best people to get right now.
I think you're right. We need a core of super people, but the key is we need a way of expressing the argument. And I don't think the argument's hard to sell. I mean, it ain't hard to sell maximum individual. What I've got here, that ain't a hard message. Maximum individual freedom governed by individual rights. That is not a hard message to sell. Would you like more freedom or less? You know, would you want the government telling you what to do, what to eat, where to go, where you can visit, or would you like to choose for yourself? That's not a difficult message to sell. It's very difficult for the government to get their message across, which is state controls everything. That's a difficult message, and it's taking them decades to do, but they're making a final spurt for the finishing line, I think. So it's up to us to see if we can get some more people along.
Okay. Right. Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks, Peter, for your contributions, and everybody else. We'll wrap it up there because